There was no big announcement, no primetime speech, no signing ceremony with the flags and the gold pen, no breaking news banner that made you stop scrolling. Just a government report quietly released this week by the Office of the US Trade Representative sitting on a website almost nobody reads. And buried in that report is a plan to put new tariffs on goods coming in from around 60 countries. Tariffs between 10 and 12.5%. China, Brazil, Japan and India are looking at the higher end of that. 60 countries. Take a second to picture how much of your life that actually touches. The phone in your hand, the shoes on your feet, the coffee in your cup, the car in your driveway, the little gadgets and chargers and parts scattered all over your house. A huge slice of all of that crosses a border before it ever reaches you. So when a single report quietly proposes raising the cost of bringing goods in from 60 different places, it is not some abstract policy floating somewhere far away. It reaches right into the most ordinary corners of your day. Now here is the part that should make you sit up. The Tax Foundation, which studies this stuff for a living, looked at the full sweep of these Trump tariffs and called it the largest tax increase as a share of the economy since 1993. And they put a number on what it costs the average American household next year. About $1,500. So while everyone was watching everything else, the most expensive thing happening to your wallet got rolled out in a document you were never meant to read. And that is exactly the trick. This is what I want to walk you through today, because once you see how this machine actually works, you cannot unsee it and you will spot it every single time from here on out. So let me explain what was actually in that report, who really pays for a tariff, why they did it this quietly, and most importantly, what a normal person can actually do about it. Because there is plenty you can do, and most of it is just about timing and staying calm. So why would a tariff plan show up in a dusty trade report instead of a press conference? To answer that, you have to understand what happened the last time around. Earlier in this whole tariff push, the administration went big and loud. They reached for emergency powers, slapped tariffs on fast, and dared anyone to stop them. And someone did. The courts stepped in and blocked a chunk of it. There is even a separate fight happening right now where a federal ruling says the government has to pay back around $166 billion in tariffs it collected under an emergency authority that the Supreme Court overturned. That repayment actually started back in April. But the administration is fighting it, appealing the ruling, and resisting handing all of that money back at once. So picture being in that position. You tried the loud way, the court said no, and now you are on the hook for a refund the size of a small country's budget. What do? You do not try the same thing again. You get quieter, and you get more precise. That is the real story here. This new wave is not a guy swinging a sledgehammer. It is a guy who went and read the rulebook, found the cleanest legal tool available, and is now using it carefully so it actually holds up. I want to sit on that $166 billion number for a second because it tells you everything about why the approach changed. That is not a rounding error. That is a federal court saying, in effect, you collected this money on a foundation that the Supreme Court knocked down, so it has to go back. Repayment started in April, but the administration is appealing and it is resisting paying all of it at once. Whatever you think of that fight, look at the lesson baked into it. If you build a giant tariff program on shaky legal ground, you do not just lose the program when a court strikes it down. You can be forced to unwind it and hand the money back. That is an enormous, expensive mistake to make twice. So the obvious move, the smart move, if your goal is tariffs that survive, is to stop reaching for the shaky tool and start reaching for the sturdy one. And the tool they reached for has a name. It is called Section 301 of the Trade Act. I know, the second you hear a number and the word act, your eyes start to glaze over. Stay with me because this one matters. Section 301 is one of the most flexible trade weapons a president has. Here is the part that should get your attention. There is no cap on how high the tariff can go, and no limit on how long it can stay. Think about that for a second. Most powers come with guardrails, a ceiling, an expiration date, something. This one is built to be open-ended. That is not an accident. That is why they picked it. Let me put no ceiling, no expiration in plain terms because it sounds dry, but it is the whole ballgame. Most tools that affect your money come with built-in limits. A speed limit caps how fast you can go. A lease has an end date. Even most emergency powers are written to fade out once the emergency does. Those limits are what let normal people sleep at night because you know the worst case has a boundary. Section 301 is different. The level can go up and the duration can stretch out, and there is no automatic point where it just expires on its own. So even at 10 or 12.5% today, the structure underneath it is the kind that can be turned up or left running indefinitely. When you are choosing a tool and you reach for the one with no off switch and no ceiling, that tells you something about how long you intend to use it. Now, the official reason given for these particular tariffs is forced labor. The argument is that goods from these countries are tied to forced or coerced labor somewhere in the supply chain, and tariffs are the response. And look, on the surface, fighting forced labor is something almost everyone can agree with. That is part of what makes this so clever. It wraps a giant tax change inside a cause that sounds unarguable. Who is going to stand up and say they are pro-forced labor? Nobody. So the framing does a lot of quiet work here, and that is worth noticing on its own. But the framing is not the part that hits your bank account. The mechanics are. So let me clear up the single biggest myth about tariffs, because almost everyone gets this wrong, including a lot of people who should know better. When you hear that the United States put a 12.5% tariff on goods from another country, it sounds like that country is the one paying. Like we are charging them a fee for the privilege of selling to us. It feels good. It feels like winning. It is also not how it works. A tariff is a tax on the importer, and the importer, this is the part that gets lost, is almost always a company based right here. The importer is the American company bringing the product in. When a US business brings in sneakers, or auto parts, or electronics, or coffee, and there is a tariff on it, the American business is the one writing the check to the US government at the border. The foreign company on the other end usually does not pay a dime of it. So now you have an American company facing a brand new cost on everything it brings in. And companies, surprise, do not just eat costs out of the goodness of their hearts. They pass them down the line. The wholesaler raises the price to the retailer raises the price to you, and the tariff that was supposed to punish another country quietly lands in your shopping cart instead. Let me make that concrete, because numbers in the abstract never really land. Imagine a US company that imports a popular pair of sneakers, and let us say they bring them in for $50 a pair. A 12.5% tariff lands on that, and now that company is paying an extra $6.25 to the US government on every single pair at the border before they have sold a single one. Multiply that across thousands of pairs and you are talking about a real painful cost. So what does that company do? It does not call up the foreign factory and say, hey, you owe us. The foreign factory already got paid. Instead, the American company quietly nudges the price up. Maybe not by the full $6. Maybe they split it, eat a little, pass most of it on. Either way, the shoe that used to cost you $80 now costs you $85 or $90, and nowhere on that price tag does it say why. That is the whole magic trick, and it is why this stuff can fly under the radar for so long. The price tag never says tariff, it just says the number is a little higher than it was last month. A tariff is one of the rare taxes where the people paying it mostly do not realize they are paying it. I mean, think about that for a second. It is a tax that hides inside the regular price of normal things, which is exactly why a $1,500 hit per household can happen without a single person feeling like they got a tax bill. Now, you will sometimes hear that foreign exporters eat part of a tariff by lowering their own prices to stay competitive, and that can happen around the edges. But here is what you need to hold on to. The further a cost has to travel down the chain to reach you, the more invisible it becomes and the easier it is to blame on anything except the policy that caused it. Higher prices get blamed on greed, on the season, on shipping, on the weather, on bad luck, almost never on the quiet line in a trade report from months earlier. That gap between cause and effect is not a bug. For a quiet rule-out, it is the entire point. And here is the detail almost everyone misses. These specific tariffs are not even live yet. This is not a the prices changed overnight situation. The report kicks off a public comment period that runs through July 6th, with hearings the following day on July 7th. That window exists for businesses, trade groups, and regular citizens to weigh in before anything gets locked in. Pay attention to this next part because it explains everything about the timing. That comment period is not just bureaucratic box checking, it is also runway. It gives the plan time to settle in as the new normal, so that by the time it actually takes effect, it already feels inevitable, like something that was always going to happen. Quiet rule-out, slow timeline, cause nobody can argue with. Every piece of this is designed to keep you from reacting. Think about how that compares to the loud version. When something explodes onto the news with a dramatic speech, people get angry, they organize, they push back, and the courts get flooded with challenges while everyone is still paying attention. But a slow procedural rollout does the opposite. There is no single dramatic moment to rally against. By the time the cost actually shows up in stores, the outrage window has already closed and the story has moved on to 10 other things. You cannot stay furious about a trade report from months ago. That is the genius of doing it quietly. It is not just that fewer people notice at the start, it is that the anger never gets a chance to build because there is never one big moment for it to attach to. This is the same reason the most expensive changes to your money so often feel boring on the surface. Boring is camouflage. Flashy headline gets fought. A dull report gets ignored. And anything that gets ignored gets to keep working quietly in the background on a timeline that suits the people who wrote it and almost never suits you. Now, before we go further, if this is the kind of breakdown you actually want, the version where somebody slows down and explains how the money stuff really works, instead of just yelling headlines at you, do me a favor and hit subscribe. We do this every single day on Sarah Finance. One clear money story, explained like a friend would explain it, so you are never the last person to find out something this expensive. Subscribe and you will not miss tomorrow's. The reason this particular tariff wave stings more than it would have a couple of years ago comes down to timing, and the timing is genuinely rough. Inflation right now is running around 3.8% year over year. That is the hottest it has been since 2023. A good chunk of that is being driven by oil and tension in the Middle East, the kind of thing no trade report can control. So prices were already climbing before any of this. Now you are adding a fresh layer of tariff costs on top of an economy that is already running warm. It is like turning up the burner on a pot that was already starting to boil, and it gets more interesting. For a long stretch, the conversation was all about when the Federal Reserve would cut interest rates, when borrowing would get cheaper, when your mortgage and your car loan might ease up. That conversation has flipped. Markets have actually started pricing in the possibility that the Fed raises rates later this year instead of cutting them. A rate hike, the thing nobody wanted. Tariffs feed directly into that fear because tariffs push prices up, and rising prices are the exact thing that makes the Fed nervous about cutting. So this is not happening in a vacuum. It is landing at the worst possible moment when the system is already leaning the wrong way. Let me connect those dots so it really lands, because this is where a lot of people lose the thread. The Federal Reserve's whole job, simplified, is to keep prices from running too hot. When inflation cools down, they feel comfortable cutting rates, which makes loans cheaper for everybody, your mortgage, your car, your credit card. When inflation heats up, they do the opposite. They keep rates high, or they even raise them to cool things off. Now drop tariffs into that picture. Tariffs are, by design, a thing that pushes prices up. So adding a fresh wave of them right now is like handing the Fed one more reason to keep the brakes on instead of letting up. Which means this is not only about the price of imported sneakers, it can ripple into the cost of borrowing money for things that have nothing to do with trade at all. That is how one quiet report can reach into corners of your budget you would never connect to a tariff. And here is the part I do not want you to miss in all of it. None of this means the sky is falling. Prices nudging up by a few percent on certain goods is not a catastrophe. It is a headwind. But headwinds are exactly the kind of thing where knowing they are coming makes all the difference between getting pushed around and leaning into them on purpose. So let me pull the lens back for a second, because this is bigger than one report. When you stack it all up, you start to see the actual shape of the thing. There was the loud first attempt that got blocked in court. There is the $166 billion refund fight still grinding through appeals. And now there is this new, quieter, more careful wave built on a legal tool with no ceiling and no expiration. This is not one event. It is a strategy that keeps adapting every time it hits a wall. Block one door and it comes back through a quieter one. That is the machine. Once you understand it is a machine, the whole "wait, when did this happen" feeling starts to make a lot more sense. Okay, deep breath. I have just spent a while explaining how the costs land on you, and if that is all I gave you, I would basically be doing the same thing the headlines do, dumping a problem in your lap and walking away. So let us flip it, because there is actually a lot a normal person can do here, and none of it requires you to be rich or to understand trade law. It is mostly about timing, awareness, and not panicking. Let me give you the practical side. The first one is the timeline itself, and it is genuinely good news. Remember, these specific tariffs are not in effect yet. There is a comment period running through early July before anything is finalized, and even after that, changes like this tend to phase in rather than flip on overnight. So if there is a big purchase you have been circling, the kind of thing that leans heavily on imported goods, you have a window right now where today's prices are still today's prices. I am not telling you to run out and panic buy. That is the opposite of the point. I am saying if you are already planning to buy something major this year, knowing a price bump might be coming gives you the gift of timing it on purpose instead of getting surprised by it later. The second thing is simply knowing where this is going to show up, because that turns you from someone things happen to into someone who sees them coming. Tariffs hit imported goods hardest. That means electronics, a lot of clothing and footwear, certain car parts and vehicles, plenty of household items, and yes, some everyday stuff that quietly relies on global supply chains. When you understand that the increase is going to live inside those categories, a slightly higher price stops feeling random and starts feeling explainable. And honestly, when you understand why a price went up, you make far calmer, far smarter decisions about it than the person standing next to you who just feels vaguely poorer and does not know why. The third one is about your own reaction, and it might be the most valuable of all. The entire design of a quiet rule out depends on you either not noticing or quietly freaking out. Both of those reactions work in its favor. Noticing without freaking out is the move. When prices nudge up over the next year, you are not going to spiral because you will already know the mechanism. You will know it is a tax passed down the chain, not some mysterious force, and not a sign that you personally are failing at money. That clarity is worth real dollars, because panic is what makes people sell investments at the bottom, rack up bad debt, or make rushed decisions they regret. Staying calm and informed is not a throwaway line here. In an environment like this, it is genuinely one of the most profitable things you can do. Fourth move is to take that $1,500 figure and flip it from a scare number into a planning number. A scare number just sits in your stomach and makes you anxious. A planning number actually does something. Roughly $1,500 a year, spread across an average household, works out to a bit over $100 a month, creeping into the cost of the stuff you already buy. That is not a wall. That is a slope. And a slope you can see is a slope you can plan around. Maybe that looks like trimming a little somewhere flexible, or building a small cushion into your budget for the categories you know are going to drift up, or just deciding ahead of time that you are not going to be rattled when your usual grocery run or your next gadget costs a touch more. Naming the number takes its power away. The households that get quietly squeezed are the ones who feel a vague pressure all year and never put a figure on it. You just put a figure on it. That alone puts you ahead. And the fifth thing is to keep your eyes on the slow-moving parts of this story. The parts that do not make headlines. That comment period and those July hearings actually matter. The appeal over that $166 billion refund actually matters. These are the quiet levers that decide how much of this lands and how fast. People who get blindsided by their money are almost always the ones watching only the loud stuff, the speeches and the drama. The people who stay ahead are the ones who learnt to read the quiet stuff, the reports and the rulings and the timelines. You just did exactly that for the last several minutes. That is the skill. That is the whole game. Here is what I want you to take away from all of this. The reason it felt like nothing was happening is that, on purpose, nothing looked like it was happening. No speech, no ceremony, no banner. Just a report, a legal tool with no ceiling, a cause nobody can argue with, and a slow timeline designed to make the whole thing feel normal before you ever feel the cost. Around $1,500 a year for the average household, packaged so quietly that most people will pay it without ever knowing they did. But that is not you anymore. You know who actually pays a tariff now. You know it is the importer first and you second, never the foreign country the way it gets sold. You know why they kept it quiet, why they reached for Section 301, and why the timing on top of 3.8% inflation and a nervous Fed makes it sting more than usual. And you know the moves. Time your big purchases while the window is open. Know which categories the cost will hide in. Stay calm when prices nudge up, because calm is what protects your money when everyone else is reacting. And keep watching the quiet stuff, because that is where the real decisions get made. And this is the part that is bigger than tariffs or any one administration. The most expensive things that happen to your money rarely arrive with a warning label. They almost never come with a speech. They show up quietly, wrapped in language that is boring on purpose, timed so you feel them long after it is too late to do anything about the timing. So the real skill is not memorizing every tariff or trade rule. It is learning to notice when something quiet is actually something big. You just did that today. Keep doing it, and you will be a step ahead of almost everyone around you every single time.